honey lamb, come on along, come on along. Let me take you by the hand, up to the man, up to the man, who's the leader of the band. And if you get to hear that Swanee River play in ragtime, come on and hear, come on and hear Alexander's Ragtime Band.
Absolutely tremendous. Laura and Daniel Curtis, and they're just going to make their way through to this studio so we can have a natter with them. That's just going to take a minute because they're parked across the corridor. You're listening to BBC Lincolnshire and BBC Radio Humberside, and we're about to talk to Dan and Laura coming into the studio now. Melanie's bringing them in, so guys, settle yourselves down there. That was tremendous.
That was obviously Alexander's Ragtime Band, written in 1911, so it's 100, just over 100 years old for that one. What a great song.
Interesting. But what's fantastic about it, and I suppose this is a good point for us to start our conversation, is that so much of this music is enduring. Why
Absolutely.
is
that? I think it's for me, it's the greatest collection of music. It's and Tony Bennett said himself that this music will be the classical music of the future. Yes. I think those great composers, George Gershwin, Irving Berlin, Richard Rodgers, Cole Porter, Jerome Kern, I don't think we're ever going to see wonderful talent like that again. Those songwriters who, I think their songs went to the heart, and they. You mentioned earlier, we were on the way in, we heard you were talking about how this music was, what people first danced to when they met their partners, that it was everywhere. Yeah. And, I think it's just the greatest collection of music that there is around, and it needs to be preserved, which is important.
Is the mark of a great song the fact that you can do what you like with it? Lots of artists can take it, bend it, shape it, give it their own treatment, and it still sounds great.
Do you know what? I think that is absolutely hit the nail on the head. That's a wonderful thing about the Great American Songbook. It's been interpreted by some of the biggest jazz legends of all time. And yeah, they do their own thing with it and they make it their own. But also, we do it in a way where it's performed in the original context. We try and perform it in a way where if Gershwin had been sat at his piano, he'd said to a friend, "Oh, come and listen to this.
Yes.
What do you think of that?" And yeah, we do it our own way as well. But I think that is the wonderful thing about the music.
Now, this is good because what you have done is sort of pared back these songs to, as you've just suggested, the way they might have sounded when the composer first said to a mate, "Here, have a listen to this."
Yeah, exactly.
This is what I'm working on at the moment, and we can almost hear the mechanics of the song. I mean, the harmonies that you just sang in Alexander's Ragtime Band, they were exposed, and actually, for possibly the first time, I realised how intricate they are.
Absolutely. I think, Irving Berlin was such a genius, and a lot of people don't know about Irving Berlin, that he wasn't a fantastic pianist by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, he wrote pretty much all of his songs in one key, and he had something that he called a Buick on his piano, which was literally a wheel that he used to turn to change the keys of songs so he could listen to how they actually would sound. Yes. And some of the first people that Irving Berlin ever played some of this music to was actually Fred Astaire. And Fred Astaire would come in and kind of sing some of these fantastic standards and just see what they would sound like. Yeah. And Alexander's Ragtime Band's quite an interesting one, because it was probably the first commercial success that Irving Berlin, really had. A lot of people don't know that Irving Berlin used to have people obviously come in and write his notes down for him, and one of those people who applied for that role with him was George Gershwin. George Gershwin was this incredible fan of Irving Berlin's work, and Gershwin came in and applied for this role and came down and he wrote some notes down, and apparently it was like a Berlin-Gershwin mesh-up, which I'd love to have heard. And Irving Berlin offered him one piece of advice. He said, "Kid, I can see you're a great fan, you're a great talent. You can have a job with me, no problem. But you'll only ever be a second-rate Irving Berlin, or you can be a first-rate George Gershwin." And I love that. That's true words.
Yes, isn't that interesting? Tell me about the way that you've set about this advocacy work, because I said in the introduction you've become advocates for the Great American Songbook. You're working in schools and community groups and things like that. How does this happen on the ground?
Well,
You know,
we think there's a number of things about the Great American Songbook. Dan touched upon people's memories, their first dance at their weddings. They had these songs. On the other side, we have a whole generation of some children who haven't heard these songs before. And some of them are tremendous fun. I Got Rhythm, which
Yes.
we were just playing. It's a brilliant song you can do, clapping with it, you can dance to it. And so we tackle it from a number of angles. On the one hand, we record the memories of people who this music is so precious to. Secondly, we go into the schools and we try and rekindle this music. We teach them the songs, they have a go at singing them, and we also tell them some of the funny stories about the composers, the ones which aren't risque. The cold water, we don't go near there. But we're just passionate about letting people love the music. The music speaks for itself, it's beautiful, and it's so special to so many people, and will be special to so many people for years to come, and that's a wonderful thing.
You know, Tony Bennett in the 1980s, he famously went back on MTV in his kind of tax and started singing this music, and it gave it a bit of a resurgence. Obviously, people like Michael Bublé now.
what a great ambassador he is for the
Absolutely.
canton, isn't he?
He's interesting because on one part he's really brought it back with that big band sound.
Yeah.
Another way he appeals to the pop industry as well.
Yes.
You know, he's like, I think he was the biggest selling male vocal artist in the world last year. You know, and I think he's got a lot to be thanked for what he's done. And I think people like Paul Anka have said that people like his career has been resurged from Michael Bublé. But there's a gentleman in America called Michael Feinstein who really I think this great collection belongs currently to him, you know. And, people in the UK are probably not aware of Michael, but Michael's got probably the greatest collection of this memorabilia any individual certainly has. And he performs like 300 concerts a year. And, he sat in Ira Gershwin, for years, and he used to go to Ira Gershwin's house and he used to play through these songs. A lot of people don't realise that one of the greatest collections of movie memorabilia was actually used as landfill for a highway just outside MGM Studios.
It's astonishing.
I know.
Incredible. And they just threw it all away. And people like John Wilson and his orchestra now, when John Wilson says, I'm having to rescore these great songs, that's why, because they were literally thrown as landfill, by MGM because they didn't want them anymore.
That's interesting.
Donated, I believe, as well.
Donated, yeah.
Yes. There was I guess you're referring to the news report recently about the way that some of the musicals, the songs written for the musical movies are now having to be rescored because the original dots didn't exist.
That's right. I mean, it's been quite a known fact for quite a long time, and I think John Wilson's touched on it quite recently when he's brought back stuff like Singing in the Rain and he's rescored them. But Michael for years has been digging out these great scores from and kind of getting hold of sub copies and ones that Gershwin wrote on himself for some of his shows. And I think what's important to get from that is there's a lot to be said when you say preservation of the Great American Songbook. We put that into a few brackets. There's the music, the stories, and don't forget the people. I think people like Cole Porter were the Lady Gagas of now. They were these people who used to throw parties and cause a big storm, and and people forget that. And I think whereas some of the music will continue to be played, do people know what Gershwin was like? Do they know what Cole Porter was like? What kind of characters were they? And I think that's just as important to know as listening to the song, because I don't think you can do them maybe justice sometimes without knowing the whole story. And that's something that we're passionate about going around. And we were invited onto the BBC One show with Tony Bennett to kind of discuss preservation of the Great American Songbook, which was obviously a massive honour to us. And another wonderful lady has offered her support recently, which is Nancy Sinatra.
Yes.
And we were so grateful. She sent us a comment that we can use for our preservation work, which apparently she doesn't do very often. So, we see it as something that we're going to continue to push, and hopefully more and more young people will become enthused in this music.
Yes, indeed. Is the Great American Songbook still open? Are people still adding to it, or is it a finite, complete collection now?
Well, it's very interesting, isn't it? It's a good question. I mean, Andrew Lloyd Webber even sometimes emanates the Great American Songbook in some of his work. I do believe that it's the great international songbook. I will say that. I mean, Ivor Novello, We'll Gather Lilacs, a beautiful piece of music, and it would be a massive shame to leave
Noel
that
Coward
out.
as well. These brilliant singers. I think the Great American Songbook was a pigeonhole title that a journalist gave when he wrote a book. And he basically, what he was writing was what he considered to be the greatest songs of that period. Before that, they were just called American Popular Song. So I think the Great American Songbook, in his book, he kind of put it as 1920 to 1960 Broadway and Hollywood musicals. But that song we just performed was 1911. So, and that's very much part of.
And it's not just about musicals, is it? Because artists like Jolson and Crosby and so on, they would take numbers like Alexander's Ragtime Band. And revamp them and represent them, and they still sounded good in.
Absolutely. Frank Sinatra famously, started to re-record his own songs. From the ones he'd recorded early on in his career.
Kept them contemporary to keep them popular.
Yes.
It's, a very clever thing to do.
And he was running out of songs. People like Bing Crosby at times sang some, even in his own words, some, not substandard material because things weren't being written for them.
Sure. So, great songs, but what you've just suggested, in order to keep them interesting, they require greater ranges.
I think that's very, very true. I mean, you've got people like Nelson Riddle and all of those who are amazing at what they did. I think what it is about appealing to different audiences. As the generations come through, there's a certain type of music that they're listening to. Michael Bublé is exactly what people are looking for now. He's cool, he's charismatic. He's got this big band sound, which is, quite fresh. He's brought the strings into the big band, and I think what he's done is kind of made it cool again. And I think a lot can be said for that. Perceived as being, something that people want to listen to. But I think, Frank Sinatra for me was the absolute master. His vocal and that kind of thing. People like Michael Bublé, of course, they're deeply inspired by what Sinatra did. But I think what is refreshing is when you see people like Fred Astaire. He never had the greatest voice. He certainly was one of the best dancers around. But what he could do...
Not a great-looking guy, either, to be honest, was he?
No, he wasn't.
But exceptionally talented.
But what he could do, though, because of his amazing sense of rhythm, when he sang a song, he actually probably understood the song better than the other people did. And if you listen to his recordings, they're intricate. And the phrasing's beautiful. But yeah, he wasn't known as... And he wasn't a big fan of singing. Yeah. We were doing a concert recently for Debbie Reynolds, obviously singing in the rain. Gene Kelly is one of my absolute all-time heroes. And she said to us that what was fascinating, she was cast in Singing in the Rain, but she had no dance experience. So Gene Kelly was like, you've never danced before. She had 6 months to get ready for this. And apparently she sat underneath a piano on the studio and she started crying because she just could not get this dance down. And apparently Fred Astaire walked up and said, why are you crying? And she explained and said, I'm just not getting this dance. I don't know what it takes to be this great.
She couldn't do it.
And he said to me, right, I'm going to let you into one of my locked rehearsals. And she sat there for about 2 hours and he was going through it rigorously and sweating and, and he was creating. And she said that afterwards he came up to her and went, now you know what it takes to be great. And literally she put everything she had into making sure she was ready for Singing in the Rain. And I love that, those stories. And that's what we find just as interesting as the music is knowing what was it like on that set at that time with those people and those characters. And they've always fascinated me, Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly. I think they're just wonderful.
Are there any accounts of what composers may have said about the way that artists interpreted their work? Because I know as somebody who's done a bit of drama writing, I'm often surprised at what comes out of it, because you think, gosh, I didn't notice that when it wasn't in my mind when I was writing it, but somebody else has found that interpretation and put another nuance on it,
I think there's been quite a few cases of that. I think, obviously, in context of shows, when people were writing certain songs for shows, it was something that fitted in with a particular kind of style or that particular film. A great one. If you think of the song "Favourite Things," written by obviously Rodgers and Hammerstein, the jazz arrangements that have come out of that, are so remotely different to that children's film.
Yeah.
But one of the things someone like Michael Legrand, he obviously, you mentioned about people still writing that music, but he famously wrote a few kind of standards, later than that kind of 1960 bracket. And it was apparently when he listened to a few of them sung by Tony Bennett, even he was quite surprised at kind of the takes that people were taking on them with the slow phrasing, that kind of almost spoken phrasing. But I think there is good examples throughout lots of where songs have been reinterpreted completely different.
There are some brilliant examples as well as when they hated it.
Absolutely.
You've got a brilliant story about Blue Moon. No.
Oh yeah, Blue Moon.
Moon.
I mean, this is a good story actually. Blue Moon, when it was obviously, it went through so many different types. That that kind of, and when they brought that kind of shoo-op-doo-op version of it,
Yes.
Richard Rodgers absolutely detested it, and he put an advert. This is true. It sounds terrible, but it's true. He put an advert out in a music magazine and told people not to buy that copy of the song because he thought it was terrible.
Which, of course, meant that instantly people would go out and buy it. It's the best thing you can do, isn't it? Try and ban something. Yeah. Well, I heard a story about Stardust.
Oh, brilliant.
And you might sort of confirm this for
Sure.
me, but apparently that was a case of, look, I've got this idea. Have a listen to this. And originally, the thinking was that it would be da 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 dum 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 dee, da dee da, and the friend sitting in the armchair said, just half the tempo.
We know exactly.
Is that right?
You're absolutely right on that. That's a definite. That was exactly. That one was half the tempo. We got another great one for you to let Laura tell you.
Someone to Watch Over Me was actually meant to be double time. Someone to watch over me. There's somebody I'm longing to see. And you can't imagine that. It was just meant to be another throwaway dance number. And he hated it. It nearly made the trash pile.
Yeah.
And one day he just sat at his piano and he started playing it slowly. And it was like the lights went on and it's like, oh, this is amazing. So yeah, another example there.
I think that's one of my favourite songs of all time, Someone to Watch Over Me.
Yes.
That Frank
It is a great
Sinatra
song.
vocal,
Yes.
that slow. And but yeah, it was supposed to be exactly in the same rhythm as I Got Rhythm. Exactly. And they hated it. Yeah, Laura said,
Interesting.
got rid of it.
I've got an email here from John, who lives in Lincoln. He was he's retired now, but he was a theatre manager in the West End in his career, so he spent his time knocking around
absolutely.
this kind of music. I'll just read this to you because I think you'll enjoy this. He says, "Howard, I'm greatly looking forward to listening to your guests this afternoon. Would you please ask them the following? America has produced a plethora of great composers and lyricists over the years, amongst them Rodgers and Hart, and Hammerstein, of course, Harold Arlen, Sammy Kahn, Jules Stein, Johnny Mercer, Irving Berlin, Hoagie Carmichael, Cole Porter, Vernon Duke, George and Ira Gershwin, Jerome Kern, Duke Ellington, Arthur Schwartz, Jimmy Van Heusen, Harry Warren, Vincent Youmans, and the late Stephen Sondheim. Whilst in the UK, there are only two, in my opinion, Noel Coward and Andrew Lloyd Webber. Why is this?"
Don't forget Mr. Ivan Novello, please.
Oh, John.
Ivan Novello was a genius as well. I think. I mean, Noel Coward, he was interesting. He had a complete style of his own. He was very quirky. I mean, we love songs like "I'll See You Again." Unbelievable. But yeah, I think Andrew Lloyd Webber's interesting. He was deeply inspired by Richard Rodgers. And there's a story where Andrew Lloyd Webber went to a Richard Rodgers musical, they invited him. He wrote to them saying, "I want to be a composer, I want to be just like you," and they invited him and they sat him right in the upper circle and he watched one of their shows. I think it was South Pacific. And after he watched the show, he went on and he felt inspired to write musicals. I mean, and he has written some quite nice kind of standard type songs that are certainly a throwback. I think in America at the time, there was this great surgence of people like Berlin and Gershwin, and they tended a lot of them time to be, a lot of Jewish music was coming through with a lot of kind of black influences. They say that Irving Berlin, what he did really was take kind of rhythms from the kind of the blacks at the time, as they called it, and reinterpreted that music for what they called the average person. He made it a way that they seen it as acceptable. And I think because it was so deeply ingrained in America, people like Coward, obviously they had the war over here and he did write some amazing songs, as did Novello. But I think being in America around that time, especially when New York was becoming cool.
So the kind of multicultural aspect of America
Absolutely.
is part of the...
I think so.
Part of the concoction. It's interesting how you can trace a lot of the social history through these songs as well, isn't it? And maybe
deeply.
that's part of the interest that remains in them.
And I think if you look at something like Putting on the Ritz, bum 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 bum, it's so Jewish, that rhythm,
Yes.
you know. And I think that's that's why I think it was the multicultural, the people coming into America at that time, you know. And they said that Irving Berlin, I mean, he donated all the money he ever made from the song, you know, God Bless America.
Yes.
And he wrote that as a token to say, thanks for America to taking me on, you know.
I hadn't really thought about this, but now you come to mention it, Chris, you've got Latin American influences
hugely.
as well, and Italian, that sort of Mediterranean sound prominent in, you know, it's through so many artists like Dean Martin and such like. They've all got that kind of...
Oh, definitely. I mean, yeah, as you said, like Latin, that you know, this song's like obviously Sway and,
Yes.
you know, those great songs. And I think that's important to remember is, you know, people, what they were doing really was a reinterpretation of sounds they heard as a child.
Yes.
And I think all composers are a bit like that. You know, any great composer, you attempt to reinterpret somehow something you've heard as a child. And, you know, Andrew Webber is famous for saying that. Stephen Sondheim, you know, just what a phenomenal masterpiece his music is. You know, and I think Stephen Sondheim probably understands the human mind better than most composers who've ever lived.
Yes. But his is a kind of... it's a different type of music altogether, though, isn't it? It's a much more intellectual exercise, I think, his music, and it tends to be coupled with hard-hitting drama, which is not what you associate with the others, to be honest. You
know, there's songs like Loving You, Not While I'm Around, I mean, you know, the most famous... you know, he's written Sending the Clowns, for instance. I mean, that's a beautiful kind of standard. But I think what people mustn't forget is the range of influences that have gone into these songs. And people are still writing. I mean, you must look at something like My Way. I mean, just to add, this was a French song. You know, it was a Comme Habitude. And Paul Anka went to get the rights for this. And David Bowie wanted this as well. And they had a big, literally, fight, fallout, whatever you want to call it, over the rights to what Comme Habitude. And Anka won the kind of battle and obviously wrote My Way, the lyrics, for Frank Sinatra. But instead, David Bowie went and wrote Life on Mars because he couldn't get My Way. Or, you know,
it's his answer to the piece, and it was obviously a big hit for him as well.
And that's quite... But you must remember that a great song, you know, so Sinatra, but that song there
spawned others.
Is a French number.
Yeah.
Mac the Knife.
Yes, of course.
Kurt Weill,
which is written for Threepenny Opera, and it's done with a harmonium. It's very dark in its original form. And
exactly.
Yet, given the sort of Louis Armstrong treatment, it just takes on a life of its own.
And I think that's, you know, you mustn't forget that these songs which you think are American songs, you know, they're not all. You know, they've come and they've expanded.
German, of course. Yeah.
Kurt Weill was, and there's obviously there's so many examples of this, and that's one of the nicest things about it. Really, the people have made the Great American Song, but what they want. You know, they've said, you know, if any song become a jazz standard, it just needs to be accepted by jazz musicians.
Yeah.
That's kind of what they say these days.
Interesting. There's one other thing I wanted to discuss with you. I could have you on for hours. These stories are fantastic. Laura, part of your work now, we've talked about the educational stuff that you're doing, but you've also mentioned the reminiscence aspect of this, and it sort of squares the circle, doesn't it? Because in order for these songs to remain in the public mind, great songs, people have to hear them and respond to them. And you're doing a lot of work with people who maybe heard them first time around because you're interested in capturing their memories and their thoughts about those performances. How does that work?
Well, basically, what we normally do is we'll go and do a performance, and we actually go to a lot of care homes as well. And we've got a special little recorder which we take with us, and we go around and we talk about, you know, things you wouldn't believe, just from weddings to, you know, even the day somebody died and a piece of music, and people's memories are so moving, and it's just so interesting to us how the music has just moved through their lives. It's weaved itself in there. And people have so many memories, and they just go, oh, and that song was playing. Oh, and this song, I liked it because of this and this and this. And it's so important. And what we're actually hoping to do is launch a new website where people can navigate these memories. And some of them, you know, are all about the same song. And I think that's so special because, you know, they're so valid. You know, they're so they deserve to be treasured. They deserve to be archived. They're so special.
Well, we know from the response we get from the music that we play on this programme that a great many people find that music does trigger memories. It's the currency of what I do on a Sunday afternoon. I'm quite honest about
definitely.
that. And that's why it's important to people. Now, we'd like to know more about your website. When you launch it, do let us know, because I guarantee that you'll have some interesting contributions from here.
Oh,
Do you know what? That would be fantastic. And in the meantime, if anyone goes to our website, which is www.greatamericansongbook.co.uk, please, if anyone is listening and would like to get in contact, if they've got any memories, if they just want to talk about the music, go on there. There's a contact section. There's where we're going throughout the country. If anyone wants us to come to their school, to come and do some recording, whatever it might be, we would love to hear from people. It really is, and I can't say how important it is to us that people are passionate about it. And if you are, get in contact. We'd love to hear from
Marvellous. Well, thank you for that information. It's been terrific talking to you. We'd love to hear you singing again. So I'm going to invite you to go back through to the other studio and give us another song.
Fantastic. Thanks for having us.
Laura and Dan, thank you so much. All the best to you in your future touring.
Thank you.
So there we are. That's Laura and Dan Curtis, advocates of the Great American Songbook. Fascinating stories. And as you heard Dan say, if you're organising a group of some sort and you want to get in touch with them, perhaps ask them to come along and do some work for you, then they would, I'm sure, be most interested in doing that. But they're just settling themselves back into the